Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 7-Minute Takeover, where we talk all things acquisitions. I'm Liz.
And I'm Eamonn.
And today we are chatting about, do you need to be a large corporation to buy a business?
Yes, we are. So a common misconception is that only businesses buy other businesses. Maybe that's competitors, maybe that's financial buyers, groups of investors. But either way, spoiler alert, this isn't true. We'll show you how you can compete with the big dogs and some of the pros and cons of being an individual buyer in this market.
So absolutely a myth. You can be an individual with personal capital and be successful in buying a small business. So one of the things is that larger acquisitions usually get the spotlight. They show up in the media, they're shouted from the rooftops, and you hear about them, but you don't often hear about the local HVAC company that got acquired or the corner store. A lot of these business transactions fall under the radar, and there's not a press release that goes out. So that's why you don't hear about them often. The other typical misconception is that a buyer has the bigger companies have the resources to outbid you, which isn't always the case. There are many reasons why you can play to your strengths and win in a competitive process. Eamonn, what are some other things that come to mind for you?
Yeah, I think those all make a lot of sense. I mean, like you mentioned, the big companies may have certain advantages over individual buyers. Those teams of professionals, existing cash flow, existing equity on their balance sheet. So there are some advantages there, but realistically, not every food truck is going to benefit from having a New York boardroom. There are certain types of companies that you may have more of an advantage over a large company if you're trying to purchase. So I mean, I think if you were to try and summarize, Liz, how does an individual buyer think about their competitive spot in that marketplace?
Yeah, well, individuals tend to buy smaller businesses than corporations or investment groups would look at. So first off, it tends to be a little less competitive in the small business, lower middle market space for buying businesses. And oftentimes these businesses, because they're smaller, they don't have, teams of management in place. And so often when the business owner is retiring and stepping out of that leadership role, they're looking for someone to move into that position and replace them as the leader of that company. And so an individual has an advantage to be that person who's going to step into operations and play that leadership role. And an individual has a great opportunity to build the relationship with the seller and build rapport with the seller, in that they can really come to be that person that the seller leans on and starts to trust as the person who's going to lead the team and lead their people going forward. And that's one of the biggest concerns in a business transition is this person or group who's looking at buying my company, are they the right people to lead my teams and lead my people going forward? And that's one of the biggest question marks that business owners have when they're choosing who to sell to. So as an individual, it's one of the base advantages they have.
Yeah, tough to just pass the torch to a corporation and walk away feeling maybe good about yourself. So you can leverage that emotional connection, as Liz mentioned. In a previous life, I advised large corporations on acquisitions, and I can tell you that their boards of directors are not just worried about getting a little extra revenue or a little extra cash flow. They want to know that the effort being made to acquire and integrate that company is worth the effort. It needs to be needle moving for them. And so, if you find a smaller business, it's just not going to attract that type of attention. Finally, if there is a lot of risk of in the business model of that seller leaving, again, like Liz said, the corporation may not be as interested in devoting time to ensuring that proper transition. They wanted to follow a formula that they've acquired businesses on in the past. And so finding a way to retain the seller in a meaningful capacity to kind of reduce that risk may only be possible if you're doing it in a flexible individual buyer scenario. Liz, have you seen this kind of dynamic play out before?
Yeah, I have. And I mean, it's always a case by case and it depends situation. There's transactions where it absolutely makes sense to sell to a strategic, a larger corporation in the space already. Or there's instances where a business owner goes to market and they give specific instructions to the M&A firm or the broker who's representing them and saying, absolutely, here's my do not contact list. I do not want my competitors to know that I'm for sale. I do not want to engage in conversations with them. I am not willing to entertain them as a buyer. And sometimes they are absolutely kind of forbidden. They're forbidding their broker, their advisor to engage in these conversations. So it depends. It always depends. But coming back to our myth today of, can an individual who's looking at their first business acquisition be successful? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we've solidly shattered this myth. I think, entrepreneurship through acquisition as a category wouldn't exist if this myth were true, and we'd see a lot less buyers in our marketplace looking to acquire companies if it were true as well. So I think with that, we'll look to wrap up. Liz, any recommendations for people to follow up in the next week and move their acquisition process along?
Yeah, if you're still someone out there looking to buy a business and looking for more opportunities and you haven't checked out our marketplace, jump into Village Wealth Marketplace or buyandsellabusiness.com to see if there's any opportunities you haven't already discovered. So we'd love to have you.
Yeah, and thanks for hanging out today. Next session, we'll dive into the myth that you need to have a finance or investment banking background to acquire a business. We'll try and debunk that one as best we can. But until then, have a great week.
Take care, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.